Good morning. It's wonderful to spend time with you again. I really do honor the time that I get to spend speaking with you as a community. I honor your ear each day, and I welcome you to our service. And I hope that you enjoy the talk. And if this is your first time listening, then I hope this is a great way for you to begin your journey. My name is Kenneth Winfrey. And aside from serving as volunteer council board president, I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. I've been a part of this community for quite some time. And in fact, my talk today is about this lineage of metaphysics. And I'll include a lot of my story about how that lineage worked for me. And because it's such a broad topic, I think that it is probably best served a little bit by my own story and some of the stories that others who would call themselves a part of that lineage might share about themselves. And so today I just want to invite you to ground yourself with me in this moment of recognition and the opportunity that this talk will give us to really relish in the contributions to the lineage of our own lives that each moment represents. This contribution to the lineage of wisdom and a journey that we share with each other through our stories. So I'm always thankful as a social worker to hear the stories of the people that I work with, because whether we know it or not, each and every moment of our lives is worth the gratitude in trusting its contribution to our own body of wisdom. And then as we pass that on, it becomes a lineage. As we release that word to other people, that's what's creating the lineage in the future. So I invite you today to anchor this knowing with me by saying, and so it is. So thank you again for sharing time with me today. Now, what is this lineage, right? And what is mysticism? These are kind of some deep terminology here. So I think we ought to break it down a little bit. Lineage for me is a difficult term because it kind of conjures up some things about privilege and heritage and pedigree that I've actually learned that I had learned to become a bit uncomfortable and found objectionable. After all, so many wars have been fought over lineage on land, lineage with a prophet. Lineage is found to be misreported. Thanks to DNA testing, we found a lot of lineages misreported. However, though, when we really look at this word beyond this meaning, we find this other source that kind of references the biological meaning of the word. It is the lineage, a sequence of a species which is considered to evolve from its predecessor. So when we have our mystical experiences, we are preparing ourselves to share that with someone else. We're sharing our stories in who we are. We're sharing our stories with those that may not come after us in time, in birth, but those that share space with us and in a way that contributes to their well-being. So now, and how ironic, right? That this biological definition of relationship kind of dominates my perception of the word. And it's a scientific word, this word biological. This scientific meaning that it's not mystical or transcendent meaning, right? And it actually brought me some relief that wasn't all that we were seeking. Now, curious enough, my own DNA, kid you not, makes me like a genetic cousin to Ramesses III, which I think is kind of interesting in the context of my talk today. And it actually feels quite resonant. So that leads me back to where my lineage picked up. Way back when I was about 21 years old, not that way back, but a while back when I was 21 years old, During my early 20s, I had the blessing of friends and others who had exposed me to this really wide variety of alternatives to the Christian upbringing I had. I was always curious about something that actually did feel Egyptian within me. I was always ready to absorb anything also about chakras, astrology, philosophy, and I found everything about Egypt to be beautiful. Not mummy horror movies and all of that, it really seemed silly to me. It never seemed like it belonged. It always seemed like somebody's desperate attempt to make a horror movie. I don't know. And I don't mean any offense to anyone who's like really into mummy horror movies. Give me a call. We'll talk about it. But by the time I reached college, I had become acquainted with some really interesting ideas, not the least of which was this profound realization and conversation that my beloved Egypt was not vaguely in the Middle East, but right at the top of Africa, a place that was pretty much associated unfairly with nothing but famine when I was a child. And, you know, the U.S. and other places in the world have ignored these beautiful big cities like Nairobi and Accra and Lagos, Alexandria. Alexandria, right there in Africa. There were a lot of powerful speakers that came to my school, Pan-African speakers, various schools of thought in philosophy and anthropology, sociology, the social sciences in general, that brought these alternative theories that many of which have panned out over the years. But when I was about 22, I had a job as a software consultant and kind of software engineer, developer. And I read software books at night and learned just enough efficiency to sneak over to the library during the day when I might have been at my desk and read books on the tarot and other things. I was still taking classes off and on to finish my unfinished psychology degree, and was required to do this report on the classical world. I was required to do, as most of you might have been, a number of reports on things in the classical world. Basically, I had started a number of fights with professors, like any good student, on the notion that it made less and less sense to presume, basically, that anyone looked like Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra or Jeffrey Hunter as Jesus in The King of Kings, right? And I found it easier to imagine Mary Magdalene, for example, looking more like Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura in Star Trek, or Diane Carroll from so many wonderful TV shows, including Dynasty, right? Just reading about the context of that place, studying the people that are there and looking at the people that are there, it became abundantly apparent to me that, you know, Mary Magdalene's eyes were probably brown, you know. So again, as a scientist, I didn't seek not only the great esteem it edified in me to one, be right in class, you know, and two, to feel as if I was actually connected to these people. And also the kind of the rush of feeling like I had uncovered and a long-standing untruth, which is something that seems to be a trend of a desire to experience these days. But I found a book written by an archaeologist who looked at the bones of mummies and other artifacts, other human artifacts from Egypt, and observed unique features that seem to actually match other people from Africa specifically. I mean, get yourself out of here, right? Come to find out, we do have a slightly different skull for people who have more of an origin in Africa, and then for those who have more of an origin in places after migration, the skull changes. So it was really interesting to learn that these were some of the features, but he brought it all together, not only to these biological features, but also the cultural and environmental features that aligned with them. And so, and some of these things are the things that are attributed to our classical teachers, like Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and even Pythagoras, and many others. Interestingly, they told us that they had learned at the feet of Egyptian masters at the School of the Mysteries near the pyramids. Okay. And they learned some things in the pyramids. This was all many years before I would learn about my heritage with Ramesses III, which I just learned about maybe in the last 10 years because of DNA testing, that some of the slaves, that some of the people in my family came through the Bahamas, that there was this genetic cousin that is our ancestor. And then beyond that, apparently there's a shared male ancestor. So yeah, we're genetic cousins, right? So again, I feel, this biological connection may have been urging me on. And I also know that our spiritual lineage began like mine before I even knew that any of that was scientifically relevant. I'd still be an Egyptophile, as we're called, even if I didn't know those things. But one of the things that I learned in this archaeologist's book, his name is Ivan van Sertima, and he wrote a book called Egypt, the Black Child of Africa. One of the things that Van Sertima shared as a common philosophical framework was something called the 7 Hermetic Principles. The 7 Hermetic Principles include things like the principle of cause and effect. We're all familiar with these things, but we probably haven't heard them described this way. The principle of vibration, which teaches that everything is always moving, nothing's at rest. And this is a great understanding how circumstances do change and how we can use the law of attraction, for example, by tuning in to the vibration through treatment and prayer, the frequency of the realities that we envision and that we accept. And with vision, vibration brings a clear design and a sense of the capacity to bring life forward, to bring this manifestation forward, or to bring an experience of life forward. Okay. Now, the principle of polarity is another principle, and it teaches us that we can trust that all things have an equal opposite, and that they exist in varying degrees upon varying degrees. I am less a horse and more of a human, although I do work hard. Okay. So using the law of polarity doesn't just tell me how to read a thermostat. It helps me to permit myself some greater experiences that make everything and every thought a doorway to a new reality. And so it is also a law that everything is mental. Okay. So when I can imagine myself as a bird, I can feel inspired, even though I might not be able to fly, just as I can imagine myself as a horse working very diligently and with a lot of effort. Now, the principle of polarity also encourages us to look at things more than one way, that you can see a planet from a North Pole or a South Pole. And so it's important to be able to look at things that way as well. Now, I had spent time, like I said, reading these dusty books at the beautiful St. Louis library downtown there. I had picked up some Greek and even took Latin to navigate a lot of reading adjacent to the 7 Hermetic Principles. And then I arrived to find that this white guy, 6 years older than my grandfather, has summed it all up in English, no less, named Ernest Holmes. I have been doing more consulting in Albuquerque shortly after the near-death experience I've shared with the community before, and I had met Rodney Bowe. And during our conversations, we would talk and talk. Both of us can really talk. And he would often say, "You sound like my preacher." And so now the things I was saying, they weren't sounding like the missionary Baptist preachers I grew up with. So I had to ask, what the heck kind of preacher are you talking about? So I came for the first time in November of 2004. I've been through a lot of difficulty with my health, as I had shared, and I sat in the second pew near Rodney's, near the instruments, near the band. And I was wondering if I would actually hear something this time that might melt the shell of ice that had kind of grown me around me against church, against organized religious institutions, and anybody that wanted to preach at me, basically. And I felt tears in my eyes before the service even started, because I guess something in me knew was that it was about to happen, or just that the hope was there, and that I could be reopened and maybe melted down to my constituent heart, right? And again, maybe find myself availed to learn at the feet of another called a preacher again. So Patrick opened his mouth shortly after Kathy Azar did announcements. I think Bonnie was sign language interpreting away, and his words did indeed fall upon me like water in the desert. I found home. And that's something folks say when they're among those of similar lineage, right? I went home elated. I called all my friends. They found their science in my communities as well, wherever they lived. But one of the first things that Patrick mentioned was this notion that to each of us is accorded how we believe. And this rang all sorts of bells that I had had many years to ponder the notion of vibration and mentalism, and this idea that the world around me and my perception of it were manifestations of choice, as well as a collection of what's happening perhaps to me. This is also about what is happening in me. I tried all the early tricks young musicians do. I tried to manifest things that were out of harmony, and the universe replied like any computer student might have learned: garbage in, garbage out. Where my visions were not clear and in alignment, I just have a nice fantasy written in prayer form. When I did learn it well, I manifested all kinds of stuff, though. Fresh out of a near-death experience, I found myself with a partner and children, something that I had always wanted and seemed almost out of reach for a gay man. I, with the inspiration with my friend Glenn Buckland, grew that counseling practice that pays just the way he said it would in both money and joy. Where I had sought two different goals, being a Black social justice warrior in the classroom and something that could help me bring meaning to the myriad, often negative experiences that made up my life as a Black gay boy in North St. Louis, born in 1972. So it's also, though, important and interesting that I didn't think of these things as scientific until I really learned about science. We think that the mystic and the science are somehow juxtaposed. And I can tell you that science is about repetition. So science is about replication. It's about us being defined by what we have done repeatedly. It's about the little marks we've worn into the carpet in establishing consensus, just like we do with our council, with our leadership council. This process isn't new either, and the consensus building process has been documented in cultures that cite a time before human memory, and even before humans left Africa many, many thousands of years ago. Well, and that's because science is good thought. It's replete. It seeks consensus, it seeks meaning, and it seeks to reconcile all of these. There's no law of not enough, just so you know. There's the law of conservation, but no law of lack or abundance per se. The ancient lineage say we might look to cause and effect to better understand how our vibration is placing us on the pole of this thing called abundance. They say we must be open to these cues and to apply the law of harmony or correspondence, knowing that in oneness all things do reconcile, and that all things are in harmony even if we are not capable of seeing it. The law of correspondence states that most of the time we are just seeing our situation from a level of vibration, and sometimes the other levels can't be appreciated. Now let me correct the potential illusion that we are here just to reframe and accept everything. In fact, some of what we are thinking about ourselves needs to be rejected in order to be in a vibration for accepting greater gifts. The 7 Hermetic Principles is just one example of the human heritage along the path to discovery. The Science of Mind, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, and so many other good writings are the shared legacy and heritage that we can all belong. This heritage need not be exclusive to a particular DNA attribute or passed down from our mothers like an Orthodox Jew. This heritage is available whether Sunni or Shia, Protestant or Catholic. This heritage defies the word new, as we call it new thought, because it ain't new. My grandmother would say, ain't nothing new under the sun, baby. That's Ecclesiastes, right? So, it might feel new in a world that's using things that may not feel complete, and maybe they feel old rather than venerable or generative. It might seem new because somebody has a new way of saying or teaching it, but it feels like thought because it is, and thought ain't new. So I invite you, however, to bring a thought new to you. That's kind of like the last car I bought. It's new to me, but it's probably not new to the world. Now, interesting enough, some people buy cars with the money they inherit. For some of us, it's the vision that invents new ways of moving, and they're perhaps okay with a less newer car in order to give more resources to bring life to that invention. They are also beneficiaries of the wisdom-seeking folk that came before us. Now, I have to admit, this path is covered by various ethnicities, and each culture corresponds to history around this in ways that are unfortunately attributed to conquest. It's rarely ascribed to women, so I just want to give a quick shout out to Emma Curtis Hopkins and the folks who influenced her, like Melinda Kramer, Nona Brooks, and Fanny Brooks. I want to acknowledge these wise women and other wise women in history. I presume that even those wise men came from someone who could give birth, even if now they don't call themselves women. It's also interesting that they saw gender as a construct, and they knew that on the scale of polarity that a lot of these things that seem new are quite possible for us to experience in our identity. So I'm going to wrap up, but I want you to know that one of the greatest things about these wisdom teachers is that, and one of the men who's attributed the 7 Hermetic Principles, his name is Hermes. He's also known as Imhotep. And the Egyptians attributed all of their arts and sciences to him, not in mythology, but their arts and sciences. And so just know that you're a part of a heritage that's thousands of years old as a member of this community. And I love you and I welcome you here. And so I invite you to know with me today and declare your own personal inheritance. And I invite you to know that each of us is making an etheric contribution to wisdom as we go. And so it is. And thank you so much.